Good evening, everyone, and thank you all very much for coming. We don't have quantity, but we have quality. Well, and I might add that, as I said to Mr. Harding coming into the room tonight, you're the only game in town as of now. So it's called a monopoly. I wish to respectfully recognize that the Coast Salish nations upon whose traditional territory we are located. Our first order of business is a staff presentation, and it's from our Manager of Finance, Mrs. Lovegrove, who will present the 2015 to 2019 draft financial plan. Mrs. Lovegrove.
Thank you, Your Worship. So since we left the last meeting, we have had a few changes based on the information that we have received that we are able to update the budget document going forward. So as of February 23rd, when we last left, based on the discussions we had, this was what the projected accumulated surplus was looking like. So the adjustments we have made, since how we substantially finished the year-end, we're able to update the reserve fund opening balances. We know what the closing balances were for 2014, so we've changed those, updated those. We've adjusted the tax increases. So for the years 2015 and 2016, we've got them in at 2%. They were originally 2.5 and 3%. And for years 2017 to 2033, they are now in the model at 2.5%, and they were originally 3%. Part of this tax increase reduction was that we have adjusted the assessment figures due to the new construction information and preliminary amounts that we received from BC Assessment. We're still waiting to get the final adjustments from them for the final amounts. We also added $500,000 worth of gas tax revenue to capital projects in the years 2016 to 2024. We removed the bylaw officer position, the new bylaw officer position, and the associated bylaw vehicle that would have been required for that position. For capital projects, 2 road projects were deferred from 2026 and 27 out to 2030 and 31. So they're listed there for you.
Could you please stop for a moment? I want to make a comment or an observation. On the deferred capital plan, Highway 19A, pinned to the city limits west, was there a discussion about the potential increase for traffic in the meantime with that location, given the way that things were supposed to go a little bit earlier?
If I may, Your Worship, through the rest of Council, at this point, this was more on a financial basis. If you look at when we were looking at the 20-year plan, in that time period, there was a substantial amount of capital projects in 1 year, which basically created a hump. By deferring those projects a few years, it took that hump out and it eliminated a huge deficit by allowing us to accumulate a bit more funding. So it was strictly on a financial basis to take out that big hump.
Thank you. Okay, continue. Anybody else have any questions?
Thank you, Your Worship. And lastly, we added the 2014 carry forward projects. Now, carried forward projects are those projects that were budgeted in previous years, most of them in 2014, some of them in years prior to that have not been able to been brought to completion. So the monies that was set aside for those projects is also being brought forward. So we bring forward the amount of the expense as well as the amount of the offsetting revenue. So there is no net impact on any additional in the budget based on these projects. So the projects are listed for you. I've broken them out between operating projects, which total $127,000. And the capital projects. I'm not going to go through them because they are listed out, but the capital projects do total $6,188,213. So again, these are projects that were unable to be completed last year. and so have been brought forward with the intention of being done and completed in 2015. Then there's still the other items that Council needs to finish the discussion on, and those items are listed there for you.
Okay, at this point in time, yes, Councillor Salter, go ahead.
So I just want to clarify, but these previous costs, the money is already in the budget for them from previous year, and they've already been approved, I take it, from the previous year.
Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Worship. And I'm not sure where to direct the question, but because these projects were from 2014, is there any difference in pricing on some of the road work and that from one year to the next, that there's a difference in cost?
If I may, Your Worship, at this point we're not anticipating, but we really don't know until we actually go for tender. There may be, but until we actually go out to tender and get the prices back, they're the best estimates that we can give you at this time.
Follow up.
Thank you, Worship. Directed to our CEO. How many of these projects haven't gone to tender then, if they're from 2014?
With the exception of the Temple ones, which is actually under construction right now, I would have to, well, I'm guessing to a large extent, but they wouldn't have gone to tender yet.
Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Your Worship. Since I was away, it seems like we've got another draft here. I think I got 6 of them now, so it's rather hard to keep abreast of what's going on. I just received this one tonight. But I'd like to ask some questions whether these things are still on the agenda somewhere. 50,000 Parks Master Plan, 24,000 Sewer Network and Firewalk Security, 12,500 Community Park Tennis Courts Resurfacing, 10,000 Contract to Update Pre-Fire Plans, 87.5 Occupational Health and Safety Coordinator, 600,000 Archival Storage Building, 120 5,800 fireproof filing cabinets.
Yeah,
Are they still on?
Councillor Greer, that's for this year's budget, and where they're still on, we'll be discussing those. We'll be going over those.
Yeah, but are all those items still going on 215?
Yeah, they're still on the discussion, budget discussion for 215.
Yeah. So every one of those are still in here?
Yeah.
You would have to go back out over that list again. Some of those items are not in. For instance, the $600,000 for the archival storage, that has not been included in these totals at this point. It is something for Council to consider, though. And you'd have to go back over some of the other ones for me to say yay or nay.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. The $600,000 is still on. You're still looking for it if there's a discussion on it.
I'm going to be bringing it up. I intend to bring it up, Mr. Mansons. Councillor Powell?
Thank you, Worship. Just to follow up on Councillor Patterson's question. So if with the price of oil going down, would that conceivably, would we get cheaper prices for the road construction?
If I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor Powell, conceivably, yes, but it really depends on the individual contractors and the prices that they would have for these products at the time. Gas and oil that you use for your car versus the petroleum products that they use in roads are not necessarily the same. So to assume that the decreases that we've seen in the gas and oil for your cars would equate through to decreases in other petroleum products, not necessarily, although intuitively it would make sense. We won't know until we actually get the results from the tender process.
Okay, we have before us the other items to be considered, and I want to deal with them one by one, starting at the top. We had a presentation at Council, at the last Council meeting, from the Vancouver Island North Film Commission for a request for $2,500. What saith Council? Does anybody want to make a motion? Councillor.
I'm not prepared to make a motion, but I'd like to know, we turned this down, I believe, the last 2 years, 3 years? So we, in essence, since I've been here, have we given that out? In the last 6 years? I don't think so.
To the best of my recollection, the answer is no.
If I may, Your Worship, I can't recall the last time that a grant has been given to them, although I do know that at some time in the past we have provided funding to them. Whether or not it's been in the last 6 years, off the top of my head, I can't answer.
I don't think we have in the last, since I've been here anyways. But, you know, it's $2,500 is a drop in the bucket for what's happening on the island. I stayed in a hotel in Victoria this past week, and there's a movie crew there, and they get many movie crews in Victoria. They've been there in this hotel for the last 3 months. So I don't know whether we get any direct results in Parksville, and I think that's all we should look at is Parksville.
We had a presentation, Councillor Greer, while you were away at the last council meeting from the North Island Film Commission, so I'd like to hear comments from members of council
point of order,
that were at that meeting.
We need to make a motion so that we can speak to this.
All right.
And we haven't, there's been no motion seconded, so I second that motion so that we can...
Who made the motion?
Did you? Oh, I thought you did.
Okay, so I've got a motion from, and seconded by Councillor Salter. To discuss it? All right. So that we've got a mover and a seconder, and
Can I have clarification from our Deputy Corporate Officer or CAO?
If I may, Your Worship, no motion has been proposed at this time. What we need is somebody to make a resolution that the City of Parksville provide Vancouver Island Film Commission with $2,500 for 2016 or 2015.
okay. So Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. So at this point in time, I'd like to make a motion to have Council consider giving the the Vancouver Island North Film Commission $2,500 in our budget.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Salter. All right. Discussion. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Greer wasn't here when the Vancouver Island North Film Commission came, and I'm not sure if he's looked at some of the photographs and things that they presented, and I'd like to say that they have spent money in this community. I personally know that they have, and they've come and taken photos and published those, and those are a cost and everything that they've incurred without having any money from this community, and from supported Qualicum Beach and many other surrounding areas. So I think that we should seriously be a part of that.
Thank you. Councillor Oates, then Councillor Beal.
Just for clarification, the motion is for us to consider it. If we pass that, then we'll do another motion to actually do it, or what? Okay.
Councillor Beal.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I'd just like to say that I was very impressed with their presentation, the quality of it, and the thoroughness. And I think, as Councillor Patterson has mentioned, many other communities in the area are part of this and are contributing to this, and I think that we should do our part as well. I don't, as to whether or not it's the full $2,500 or if we want to look at an adjustment there, but I would like to support the idea of doing that.
Any further comments? Because the next thing I'd like to do is to ask for a motion to support the Vancouver Island North Film Commission by providing them with $2,500 for the year 2015. I'm sorry, CAO, what have I done wrong?
There's a motion on the table.
Motion, that's right. Does anybody on council want to make a motion to that effect?
There's a motion on the table right now to consider it.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
You have to ask the question on that one first,
Okay.
then the second motion.
All right. So on that first motion that's been seconded, I'm going to call the vote.
No.
Councillor Greer.
Thank you. I did have a chance to look at their material, and I can tell you from being an old printer that they've spent $100,000 or more on literature. What they put out was very, very expensive, and for the $2,500, I don't know what we received from it, but anyways, I wouldn't be in favor of it.
Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Worship. I think that what they're after costs dollars, and their brochures and the information that they handed out, I think, is geared toward people in the movie industry, and I don't think we have a place to judge how much they spend on their brochures. I too think the information that they provided was excellent information, and there have been different movies and commercials done on Vancouver Island, and historically we have not supported them. I remember the last time we supported them was in 2007, and I believe at that time we gave them a $5,000 grant. So I will be supporting this.
Can I now call the vote on the first item to discuss it? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Thank you. Now, you want to make a motion, Councillor Powell? What is that motion, please?
I make a motion that Council give the Vancouver Island North Film Commission $2,500 to support their campaign to bring business into this community.
Do I have a seconder? Councillor Salter. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Thank you. The next item is the Vancouver Island Tribute Festival that is taking place, I believe, next month. They've been asking for $1,000. The objective is for the Canadian Cancer Society. What's Council's pleasure?
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm in favor of this one. I think I'm in favor of it because I think this could be their last year wanting $1,000. So I don't have any trouble with that. I've talked to them, and I think they understand our position. And I said, because I received some letters from them, and I believe that for $1,000 I would support them this year. So I would make that motion that we give them the $1,000.
Do I have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Powell. Any further discussion? Councillor Powell, Councillor Beal, and then Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Worship. I would like John Harding to record this date. It is March 26th at 6:11. We have Councillor Greer giving $1,000.
Thank you for that. Councillor Beal, is your comment similar?
No.
No.
Okay. Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I do want to support this motion, but I do want to make it really clear that I want to support this as I see this as a piece of economic development and the possibility of such a festival growing and being very good for our whole area. I do personally like to give to charitable organizations, and I have my own particular ones that I like to support. But that being said, I understand that the money being raised by this organization for the festival goes to the Cancer Foundation. And I actually do think that as council, I think that we need to leave it to the residents to make their own decisions as to which charities they support and where they spend those dollars. And I don't think that's our place, but I do want to support it because I see it as the possibility for an off-season event that could be a really fun thing, fits really well with the profile of our community, and something that we would like to develop more. And to add to Councillor Greer's comment, I too think that they're going to be on a good road, not only because they spoke with Councillor Greer, but they have also been in touch with the Tourism Association and are taking advantage of the coaching and guidance and expertise that that organization is providing, and I know they're really enthusiastic. So for all those reasons, I do support it.
Thank you very much for those comments. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillor Beal pretty much echoed everything that I would like to say. I don't agree as well to give to any specific charity from a council perspective. If we're giving this money, then I think that you have to think about it as a grant, but it should have actually maybe have gone through our grant and aid rather than as a budget line item. But as it is a budget line item, I think that you have to treat it as a festival and as a economic growth, not as a charity. And you have to keep that in mind.
Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think we need to be clear. We're not giving to the Cancer Society. We're purchasing a sponsorship. And we get certain amount of advertising from this, acknowledgement. We're going to be on their brochures, their posters, etc. And so this isn't giving to a charity, and it is an economic driver, and it is an off-season economic driver that we need. So I just wanted to clarify.
Any further comments? Thank you, everyone. I just wanted to make a quick comment. I'll probably vote against this just because Councillor Greer is in support of it. No, I'm kidding. I'm just joking. But no, in all seriousness, it's last year I know it was a resounding success, and we gave money to them. And I agree with Councillor Greer. I think that as this gets more popular and more well attended, they'll make enough money that they can do it on their own. So now I'll call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Thank you. That is carried. Next item, the Vancouver Curling Club permissive taxation. And CAO, just clarify for me, what's the coverage now for the permissive taxation? It was $6,000. Is it less than that now?
If I may, Your Worship, I believe it's pretty much cut in half from that. The policy is that 50% of the assessed value is taxable. The other 50% is exempt.
Okay, so the amount that the curling club was looking for is $3,000. Does anyone feel strongly one way or another about this? Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Your Worship. Well, I was the chairman of the committee that came up with all the permissive exemptions, and I think they had just cause in doing what they did. The curling club originally was going to have to pay, I think, $16,000 through their methods of reassessing it. They got down to $3,000, which is less than $10 a member on their membership. And since it only involves a membership of less than 350 people, I think, I don't see why they shouldn't be paying what our board came up with. So $3,000 is not a lot of money, and there's a lot of people in this town that don't curl, and I don't see why they should be paying for it. Thank you. I think so. In other words, they should pay their $3,000.
Councillor Salter, Councillor Powell, and Councillor Patterson.
So I just have a question for clarification, so I'm not sure who will answer this. But did we support them in the past? Did we exempt their taxes in the past? And if so, did it just start now that they had to start paying, or how long has it been that we've been exempting or been assisting them financially?
If I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor Salter, I believe it was the last term of council for 2014, actually, council implemented a new policy with regards to permissive exemptions. There were several categories of properties that had been getting 100% exemptions were changed, in this case, to a 50% exemption. As Councillor Greer stated, when this was originally implemented, the assessed value through BC assessment on the property was such that the taxes would have been $16,000, or at least the exemption would have been $16,000. Through a reassessment of the property, that has now been reduced so that the taxes on the residual amount are down to $3,000. Prior to that time, they were given a 100% exemption.
Okay. Councillor Powell and then Councillor. Okay, Councillor Salter, Councillor Powell, and Councillor Patterson.
Okay, thank you, Worship. I think what's different with the curling club is that they are also responsible for all the maintenance of that building, which is a huge cost. And nobody else that's on our permissive tax list, I think, is that responsible to upkeep the building. They have to meet certain standards of the RDN. That building, they've really made that building happen. The last time they had a curling bonspiel here, it was with young people. The town was full. The rooms were booked. The restaurants, I'm sure that Councillor Patterson can attest, were full. And I think what we have to do is balance that with the economic drivers that they bring in to the community. And this isn't the only bonspiel or event that they've had in the past. They also provide services to the community. They will teach young people or new curlers for free. There's all kinds of programs that they offer to people in the community. And I think those are the hidden things about this organization. And I know we've just passed that bylaw about the permissive tax exemption. And does that mean if we do this, does that mean we go backwards with everything else? If we do it for one, will we have to do it for another? I don't know the answer to that. But I know that the curling club, while $3,000 sounds like a small amount, when you add that to all their other costs, it could be the straw that breaks the camel's back.
Thank you. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you. Councillor Powell summed up everything very, very well. And I'm going to just give a kind of an apples and orange. We just passed an item to be considered for $1,000, and we talked about it being an economic benefit. Well, I'm going to tell you as a business person, I had zero economic benefit from the one that we just passed, but I had a huge from the curling club and that this January. And I think that it is a definite, huge economic benefit to this community. And those people are maybe curlers, but they're also huge volunteers. They put an amazing amount of hours. And as Councillor Powell said, they look after the maintenance of that building as well. So those are my points.
Thank you, Councillor Beal.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I think we have a really unique situation here in that the building itself is, with the relationship with the RDN, and they're in many ways providing a service, because if it was left in the hands of the RDN, I suspect it would actually cost even more to maintain and run and so on, perhaps not to maintain. They look after the building. I think they have a huge responsibility that they've taken on, and I applaud them for that. What I would like to remind all of us here about, though, is that the report that the RDN prepared actually recommended taxing only that portion that is of commercial value, i.e. the lounge area, and I wonder if that is something that we can consider.
Councillor Salter.
So just back to some clarification, we did just pass the tax bylaw. I'm a little bit confused, because the previous council passed this bylaw that has ended up these folks are being charged, and now we're saying no, let's not charge them. So I'm wondering about that whole scheme now. Where's the value in that? Where's the value in that bylaw when we're now changing, or now we're going to change it? So someone created the bylaw for us. Now we're switching it. I understand that this is different, but should we not think about somehow removing the curling club from that bylaw if we're going to be doing this year in and year out? Why would we keep having this discussion?
I think I can answer
Okay.
that. CAO, I believe we only have two organizations, the Lawn Bowling Club and the Curling Club, that are. What's the other one? Oh, the Gun Club. So they come under the aegis of this new bylaw. Am I correct? And the Lawn Bowling Club doesn't pay any. We have a lease with the Lawn Bowling Club, and they don't pay any permissive taxation.
If I may, Your Worship, I'll back up to try and clarify as much as I can. Prior to Council adopting the new permissive exemption policy, which dictates how the bylaw would be constructed and applied, there was no policy. There was approximately, 25 organizations, plus or minus, that were getting a 100% exemption on the property taxes that they would otherwise pay. At Council's direction, staff was requested to review and provide options for Council with regards to how that could be changed looking at a number of factors with regards to the benefit that community group was providing to the city. As a result of that review, the amount of exemption for several groups of properties, recreation being the one that I can remember, there was one other group, the exemption was changed from 100% exemption to a 50% exemption. With that, we then applied the policy to the bylaw that must be passed October 31st each year for the next year. So for 2015, the bylaw, or the permissive exemption bylaw, was passed prior to October 31st, 2014. That makes the property taxable to all taxing jurisdictions, not just the city. So even if the taxes to the curling club were $3,000, the benefit, or at least the amount that the city would be receiving for that taxable amount, is only $1,500. The other $1,500 would be going to other taxing jurisdictions. We're in the position right now, if council chose to grant them relief on the $3,000 amount, you can't change the bylaw because the bylaw was in effect as of October 31st of last year. The only way that you can provide for them would be to give them a grant in aid so that they could in effect, or we would in effect give them a grant in aid for the value of the property taxes of this year. Come October the 30th, the permissive exemption bylaw for October the 31st this year, that would apply to 2016. If you want to change that on an ongoing basis, then I would suggest that you make another motion, something to the effect that staff be requested to reopen the permissive exemption policy for council's consideration with whatever specific criteria you wanted us to look at. With that, we could bring the policy back to council with review and recommendations. Council could adopt a new policy or leave it the same. That new policy, or if it was left the same, would be what would be used for the 2016 permissive exemption bylaw.
I just want to remind council that the lawn bowling club doesn't pay permissive taxation, but the gun club did. Am I correct in that statement? Yes? I see a yes in the audience from a gun club member. Okay, Councillor Salter, follow up.
Through Your Worship, to Fred. So would we want to make that motion in October when it comes up, or prior?
No, if you wanted to change it for us to be able to apply it this year for 2016, the sooner that you give it to us, the better. The bylaw has to be adopted by October the 31st. Generally, it requires 2 council meetings to do. First 3 readings, 1 council meeting, adoption the next council meeting. But if you want to change the policy as well and have an opportunity for staff to review it, give council the opportunity to give it proper consideration, the sooner that you make that motion so that we can start the process so that it's in place well in advance of the October 31st deadline, the better.
That can be done under new business then. Can we do this later under new business then? Yeah.
What I was going to ask is, what's the feeling of council for a motion with regards to a grant and aid? Anybody want to make a motion? I'll second. I have a seconder, Councillor Patterson. The motion is that we, rather than deal with the permissive taxation tonight, which we can't because we'd have to go, as the CEO has just said, go back to have the staff study it. This is a motion to give the curling club the $3,000 as a result of grant and aid. So I have a mover and a seconder. Any further discussion on that motion? Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Worship. I'm just curious, when we do the permissive tax, can we look at taxing the lounge area only? Can we do that?
If I may, Your Worship, through legislation, I'm not sure that you can be that specific, but what the legislation does allow is council to give any percentage of exemption that you want. So it is possible, for instance, to specify that building all by itself, look at the area of the building and exempt only that specific portion. That's a possibility, but again, without looking at the legislation, I'm not 100% sure. The only thing I am sure is that you can exempt any percentage that you want. How we could use that to accomplish what you're saying, I'm not sure.
Thank you.
Councillor Oates.
So an affirmative vote on this motion would mean that we would be giving them the $3,000?
Any further discussion on the motion? Councillor Greer.
Yeah, just a reminder to council that we passed this unanimous last year because we were trying to increase some revenues for the city, and when it was at $16,000, it seemed to be a fair amount. Then, of course, with the reassessments, it came down to $3,000, but we still passed it unanimously by the previous council, and there was many reasons why we did. I mean, there's a lot of groups in town that bring in millions of dollars, including our hockey tournaments every year, and there's a lot of hockey tournaments, soccer tournaments, lacrosse tournaments, and so on, baseball tournaments, and none of them come for any amount of money. So we felt the curling club is a club. It's almost a private club. I know anybody could join it, but there's only slightly over 300 people, so it is a private club, and it was strong feeling that they should pay their share. So, you know, it's not much money. In fact, the hockey club, our hockey club, gave up the parking this year for the Beach Fest to the curling club, so they could pay this amount. So we've given up one of our fundraisers so they could pay their $3,000. So now they've got our fundraiser, and they're going to have a grant of $3,000 as well. So, you know, we can go around in circles here all night.
There's a big difference, though, between this group and the groups that you identified. This group we tax. The other groups that you identified we don't tax. So that distinguishes them from the other groups.
Yeah, you're right in saying that, but it's also the amount of the economic driver that everybody keeps talking about. Our two hockey tournaments bring in $1 million too. So, and our budgets are $70,000. And we raise all that, you know, so we don't come to the city for money at any time. And I haven't had the baseball teams here, soccer teams, lacrosse teams here either. And they bring in a lot of economic business as well. So we seem to be favoring the curling club, and I'm sure most of the people that can afford to curl can afford another $10.
Councillor Beale and then Councillor Powell, and I think after that I'm going to call the vote.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Sorry to prolong this, but I do see that there is quite a distinction as well. I see that the curling club provides another opportunity for recreation, which I think our community highly values. And they are, the other groups, again, that you have mentioned are not having to pay tax. They're not having to directly pay for the maintenance of the Oceanside Arena, for instance, and other places, and they don't have the land, and the building that they're using is not their own, so they're not benefiting they're not benefiting financially from the arrangement either. So I do see that as quite different, and that is what I'm basing it on, rather than them being an economic driver or not.
A quick final comment from me, Council, if I may, before I call the vote, and I'll be very brief. We'll see the curling club issue come back to this council table at some point in time. The curling club is a very old building. In talking to my colleagues and staff at the RDN, they're looking at what the building would cost to renovate, what the building, if the chillers go and that sort of thing. So it's going to become an issue in terms of curling for the area. So this is very minimal in terms of the overall the overall situation, I would say medium term with the curling club, so we'll have to stay tuned and watch out for that. So on that note, I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Thank you. Before we go to the next item, if you'll permit me, Council, I got a letter which I left in all your mailboxes earlier this week from the President of the Association of Canadian Archivists, Ms. Catherine Harvey. And I wanted to read and make a quick comment before going around the table. She writes in her last paragraph, "It appears that the Parksville City Council will be making a perilous decision not to support the building of an archives and the implementation of a robust electronic records management system. The ACA is concerned that City Council has not fully assessed the risk and instead is proceeding on a path not supported by evidence-based decision-making." We've been in this situation now, if you'll recall Mrs. Comis's comments a number of weeks ago, that we've been like this now for 70 years, give or take. And yes, I tend to agree. I said it myself that if we don't do this, we're taking a risk. What I would like to suggest to Council, depending on the feeling around the table, is that we, at some point in time, and later on this evening I'll talk more about it, we're going to have to look in depth, once we get the budget settled, we're going to have to look in depth at the capital program. We're going to have to look in depth at what our priorities are in terms of what areas, and I'll get into that a little bit later. So perhaps we may wish to consider, unless there's strong feeling amongst the majority of Council that they want to proceed with this, but at some point in time we're going to have to bite the bullet. We're going to have to proceed to definitely not do it or to definitely do it. I don't know if you're prepared to make that decision tonight, but if you're not, it'll come back again. I'll see that it comes back again at some point in time for a future budget meeting for probably next year to see that we deal with this and get it done at some point in time, because it's very obvious from the Association of Canadian Archivists that it should be done. It's something that shouldn't be neglected for a long period of time. So on that note, I'm going to open it up for discussion regarding the archival record storage building. Any discussion from members of Council? Councillor Powell and Councillor Salter.
Thank you, Your Worship. Of all the things that were put forward to me, I think I had the strongest reaction to this one. It's $600,000, and right now I think we're in a difficult situation financially with the water treatment plant. We don't know how much money we're going to get. I think that I need to be convinced.
Councillor Salter.
So I'm not even sure what we're doing here. Are we making a decision tonight? Are we just talking about it again? What are we doing?
We're making a decision to decide to do this or not do it.
Okay, so is there a motion on the floor? Is there a seconder?
Not
what are
yet,
we doing?
unless you want to make one.
Okay, well, I would like to make a motion then. I would like to move that we determine whether or not we're going to support the $600,000 archival record storage building.
Seconder for that motion.
No, we need to speak to it so we... My motion is against this.
Is against?
Yes.
Not to do it this year? Yes. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Seconded by Councillor Greer. Discussion.
I get to speak first because I made the motion.
Yes, go ahead.
So the reason I made this motion is I have several reasons for making it. Number one, I contacted Courtney, Nanaimo, Duncan, and Port Alberni to find out what they were doing with their archival storage. No one has a $600,000 storage room. They're using their vaults for their critical documents. That's it. They can't afford to do this. So they make do, which they have been doing for the past 100 years. So that's the situation in all of the communities around us. It's like spending money like drunken sailors. We don't have $600,000 to spend. We talk about being concerned about poverty and people who are living on the street. We've got women with children in campgrounds because they can't afford to pay the rent. I can't believe this is even in the budget, that we would even be considering spending $600,000 on a room. So I'm absolutely against this at now and at any time until the economy takes a really huge turn upwards.
Thank you. Councillor Beale.
Thank you, Your Worship. I do think that at some point we need to look at properly preserving our records. What I would also like to see us do, though, in the interim, and I'm not suggesting that we necessarily put this in place right now, but I think we do need to work towards doing something properly and climate controlled and all that, whether it be in a vault or elsewhere. I'd also like to see us explore cost sharing with maybe neighboring communities or other organizations that would have similar needs, and or if they leasing space out, we're not going to need to use all of the space right away. So I think that there's some time that we need to take some time to explore how we can do this more inexpensively.
Thank you. Councillor Oates.
For me, it comes down to risk. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. So I'm not sure if this is the right time to do it. I know it's something that we're going to have to do at some point. I think we have a responsibility as a municipality and as a keeper of the public record to be responsible in the way we keep it. And Ms. Comas, when she presented this to us, I believe she used the words that she was mortified about the way our record handling was done, and that we needed to do something with it to preserve our history. So I don't know if this is the time to do it, but I do know that it's going to have to be done at some point. I echo Councillor Powell's sentiments with the water plant hanging over our head and the amount of money that we're going to have to put out there for that. It would be, I think it would be a hard sell to justify spending that amount of money in this current budget year. But I do believe that it's a worthwhile project, and maybe we put it on the books for future years or something. It's not a question of if in my mind, it's a question of when.
Thank you. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. When we're looking at the $600,000 line item, and that are items to be considered, I'm going to direct to the CAO. This is only part of the budget for that building, is it not? Is it not that we have, I'm not sure if it's the old cadet air hangar or if that's another building that we're considering as well. But is this the total cost that we're looking at, is my question first.
If I may, Your Worship, this is a standalone building all by itself. Estimated cost $600,000.
Councillor Greer.
Thank you, Your Worship. No, I'm not going to support this, but I do echo councillors who have suggested that it needs to be done at some time, but certainly not this year. I think we can maybe budget some monies over the next 2 or 3 years and get it done. But we've gone 75 years without a problem, and maybe it'll happen and maybe it won't. I don't know, and I don't know the cause if it did happen. So at this particular time, I would certainly waive it until we find out where we are with the water.
Thank you. And I as I said in my opening remarks, and I said it at the last meeting, you know, that it comes down to what risk council is willing to take. And this has been in vogue for a long time, but I definitely, as mayor, want to see this come back to the table, because we have to look at it, we'll have to deal with it. There may be other ways to cope with the storage, as Councillor Beale has talked about, looking at what other folk are doing and what might accomplish the same thing for less money, but I think it will come back. On that note, I'm going to call the vote, unless there's any more comments. All those in favor? This is Councillor Salters. Opposed? Thank you. We're taking a risk. What I'd like to do, Council, with your permission, I'd like to combine community park user fees and sports field user fees, if I may, because it's all about fees. And I would like to know if anybody wants to speak to, I know the last time there was quite a few comments made by members of council. Has there been any more thinking about park user fees and sports field user fees? Who wants to speak to it first? Councillor Beale, Councillor Salter, and then Councillor Oates.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would support having user fees, sports field user fees, and also community park user fees as needed. And what I'm thinking of there is regular leagues that might be using the fields, because the fields are not free. There's a lot of maintenance that goes into maintaining sports fields, and I think that we'd find if we polled other cities and other areas across the country, you'd find that it's generally accepted that when you're signing up for the team, that a portion of that fee goes to helping to maintain the fields.
Thank you. Councillor Salter.
So I think it's a question of recognizing what our priorities are. Number one, we've already budgeted over $1 million for parks maintenance. So the taxpayers have already paid to maintain the parks through their taxes. And staff do that work. So that's already occurring. So this is a tax on top of what they're already being taxed. They're already paying, although they've already paid to utilize the park. That's number one. And number two, what are the priorities? Do we want kids sitting in front of the TV? Because that's where they're going to be when they can't afford to use the parks. This is a cost that people can't afford. And in these times, we need to provide leadership, and it needs to be strategic. And we need to think about who is it that we're supporting here. We need to support the community. We need to support the residents who, for the most part, are on fixed incomes, whether it's parents, single-parent families, two-parent families, seniors. They're on fixed incomes. So we really need to be use our fiduciary ability here and stop increasing and stop charging and get our hands out of their pockets. That's fine.
Councillor Rhodes.
I see this as being helping the taxpayers of the city of Parksville because it is a direct charge to the people that are using it. I don't believe we're going to have a system there where the people that use, the kids that use the fields and that now in non-organized sports, I don't foresee us having some sort of a coin op there outside where you got to pay to get in. I don't foresee that. I see this as being geared towards organized teams that come to and use our fields, and our Parks Department then spends thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars in maintaining those fields. And the money that they spend maintaining those fields comes out of the taxpayer's pocket, every single taxpayer in the city of Parksville, and there's a limited number of those taxpayers that actually use that service. So I don't think there's a problem at all with asking the users to pay a fee to help mitigate the costs that the taxpayers have to pay in order to maintain those fields at a level suitable for the sports and activities that they're using them for. We have a responsibility to maintain the safety levels of those fields, or we'll end up being in a liability situation. So I think if we looked around us, we'd find that most other municipalities do have some sort of fee structure in place, and so it's not uncommon. So I would support a reasonable fee structure geared towards organized events that use our fields. And if somebody wants to rent our ball diamond for a night, then I think they should have to pay for it. And I don't think the people on the fixed income in the city of Parksville should have to pay for it. I think the people that actually use it should have to pay for it.
Councillor Powell, Councillor Beale, and then Councillor Greer, and then Councillor Salter.
Thank you, Worship. This is one that I really struggled with because part of me leans towards Councillor Salter's opinion, but at the same time, I've been on council for 9 years. We've frozen the amount of dollars we spend on upkeeping our parks. And part of why we're at this place right now is because we don't have enough dollars to maintain them the way we need to maintain them. I did have a conversation with the CAO prior to this meeting about the community park, because what does that mean? You have a user fee for the community park. So does that mean the Kite Fest will be charged for use of the field? The beach volleyball, will that be charged for the use of the sand out there? The beach fest, are they going to be charged for the space? The tennis courts? Like, there's a whole bunch of different questions that need to be looked at. We have the seniors workout. Well, I won't call it the seniors. It's not the seniors. They corrected me. The people like me go down there and work out on there.
You're a senior.
Yeah. So, yeah. So the thing is, and there's no fee for that. The kids go down and access that park all the time, and there's no fee for that. And that's the way I would like it to stay. But I understand what other councillors are saying with regard to a user fee, you know, and it does cost the city to maintain the fields. Like we just did a bunch of work up at the Springwood fields, and that was huge expense. And so I think we have to find a balance. And I'm sure, I think we discussed this the last time, is we did have the discussion about team sports, and oftentimes kids who can't afford it are subsidized. I know the RDN has a program to help families that don't have enough money. So I think it's, I don't know, I'm leaning towards doing it, so.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd just like to make it very clear. I'm not suggesting that people who go down to the park are going to have to pay something. And although they are lumped together here, they are somewhat distinct. In fact, they are quite distinct. But sports fields, leagues, and the like, I don't think it's unreasonable to collect some funds that would go towards the upkeep of the fields. It may not pay for all of it, but it would certainly help mitigate the costs. Certainly in many communities, if a large park, such as our community park, I'm going to think Vancouver now, if the Vancouver Folk Festival is set up, and I'm sure they pay something to the city for that, and people who attend that do pay some money. And I know that right now we're in a position where Beach Fest, let's say, or certain things are completely free to the public, and maybe that's what we want to continue to do. But maybe people would be fine with paying a small amount as well. And if you want the free seats, then you're outside a little farther to listen to the music. I don't know. I think that staff could have a look at this and try to come up with something that would be fair and reasonable, and also recognize groups. And I'm thinking of the school district. If school kids are using the fields and RDN, I'm not sure of all the ins and outs how it would work, but I think that something could be done that would just help mitigate the costs that we are incurring.
So with regard to paying taxes to maintain the park, that's already happening. So people are already paying taxes to maintain the park, number one. Number two, then charging teams to come in and utilize the park. These are sports teams. They're usually children. So now we're going to be charging the children and those teams to come in and use the parks because we think we need to do that. And some of the arguments I heard was, well, there's some people that aren't using the parks. They're not on the team. Why should they? I don't use the schools. My kids are done. They're out of school. I'm not using them. I'm still paying taxes for that. I pay taxes for hospitals. I pay taxes for all sorts of things that I'm not utilizing. I'm okay with that. That's life. That's how it goes. That's living. And that's what's happening in this community and every other community across BC and Canada. As far as festivals are not the same thing as using a community park, especially with children. These teams, the soccer team, baseball team, these are children. They're not the sandcastle people. So those are two different, I think, apples and oranges. My argument is I don't think we should be charging children or teams to come out and participate in sports. We need to be encouraging that, and charging them is not an encouraging way to have kids in sports, especially when their parents are already struggling to pay those fees that are already in place. If we add a cost now to use those parks and those ball fields, you know that those costs now to participate are going to go up. It's just how it's going to be. So that's my argument. Festivals isn't. It's about students and children using those parks, and the cost and the burden that we will be putting on parents and the children themselves.
Thank you, Councillor Greer, Councillor Oates, then Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm leaning towards user fees, but down the road. I think eventually it's going to come to user fees for everything. We've just given away $6,500 for people that can well afford to curl, and yet we want to charge some of these teams, and I agree with Councillor Salter. Many of them are children and young people. I know in the hockey business our registration is a way down because it costs too much to play hockey. And what has taken over is soccer. And now they play soccer because it's a fraction of the price of what it costs to play hockey. So, and now to maybe charge them on top of that, I'm not so sure that that's the way to go. I think we should keep our young people using the parks, and I'm glad they are using the parks. As far as our old-timers baseball goes, it's like the curling club. They can probably well afford a user fee, and although they would shoot me if they heard me say that. But, you know, we're giving away the curling club some money, and this is a select few of people, and yet we want to charge some of these people. I think down the road it's going to come to user fees on everything. There's no question about that, because the taxes have to be met somehow. But at this present time, I would like to see us waive this for now. And also it comes down to what you're going to charge. If you're going to charge $20 for a game of ball, or you're going to charge $300, you know. So we're talking about something we don't even know what the charge is. And if we had some definition of what the charges could be, then we might be able to make a decision. If it's very cheap, like $20, then maybe that's not a big deal. But if it's $300, that's a different question.
CAO, do you have any information on that to share with us?
If I may, Your Worship, at this point we're looking for direction from Council to if you're even thinking of considering this. If this is something that Council wants us to consider, then we would take direction from Council, the areas, categories, etc., of what's on, what's not on, review it, bring options, and a possible recommendation for Council's consideration. You're right, there has been no decision as to who, what, when, where. Is this something that's even on for us to look at to provide options, methods that are used in other communities for Council to consider and possibly even further refine. In the community park, with regards to some of the festivals that are in place, absolutely right, huge benefit to the community. Do you want to charge them? But I also know in the community park there's lots of commercial people that go in there for various functions, staff parties, etc., that get it for absolutely free. And there's still a cost to us to provide that. There's more than just kids that use our sports fields. There's lots of adult leagues and tournaments that go on. The Royals baseball team, as an example. Should they be paying something, or should they be subsidized by the taxpayer for the use of those fields? That's pretty much where it's coming from. Is there any consideration from Council with regards to this for us to review and you know, provide several options and possible things that Council could be looking at for consideration? Anything that we do right now is very, very, very unlikely that it would be in place for 2015, 2016 at the earliest. The other thing that you have to consider, or that we would be considering, is what the local communities around us are doing. If we started charging fees here, would that drive people away from Parksville fields onto Qualicum Beach and RDN and Nanaimo fields? We'd have to look at the other communities as well. So it's a big subject. The real question right now, is there any interest even to looking at it to find out what could work, what couldn't work? That's more the level that at least staff is bringing this to Council right now to consider.
You're suggesting, from what I'm hearing, you're suggesting that it would be a surgical approach, commercial events, visiting teams, and that sort of thing. It could be a different combination of those things.
Well, all of that is really up to Council to decide how you want to do it. It could be done surgically if you so choose. For instance, there's lots of different categories of people that use the community park, that book the various facilities at various times. We do have the statistics of who they are. So again, we could bring those forward as part of the options for Council's consideration.
So, keeping in line with the queue, I've got Councillor Oates, Councillor Patterson, Councillor Powell, and then Councillor Salter. Councillor Oates.
Thank you very much. That was very good information from the CAO. I think that's the sort of approach I'd like to take on it too. I'd hate to pass a motion here in council that caused some children to be barred from access to the fields. But I also think that organized events, large organized events that happen at our fields, I think that there's definitely a responsibility to pay for people there like that. I think there's a big difference between a bunch of kids getting together some afternoon, deciding to go out and play a game of ball on the field or kick the ball around, and a series of teams coming in here and having a tournament here on a weekend or something like that. Those things are hard on our fields and require a lot of work and maintenance. And I think that they should have to pay. I think that it's the different items that the CAO identified as to be taken into consideration when they come back to council with some sort of proposal are pretty good guidelines to be thinking about. Whether or not we are closing the doors to community children, and we're talking about community children, children of taxpayers. Whether or not we're moving the usage to other neighboring jurisdictions because we become cost prohibitive. We wouldn't really want to do that. But I think that I think that there's some merit in exploring charging for the larger events, and we should be given some options to consider on that.
But you definitely exclude community children from this type of fee charge.
Not necessarily. It would depend on how it went. I mean, if we're talking the school groups and something like that, I would say no. Those folks, they should not have to pay. The school groups and things like that. But if the Nanaimo kids come in here to play a soccer tournament, and the Parksville team is hosting it or something like that, then maybe that's something that should be
visiting teams.
Well, for the use of the field. You know, in other jurisdictions that I'm familiar with, they have like permit systems. So, and if you're there on the field and you're playing on the field, and somebody comes along with a permit, you're SOL. You have to leave. The person with the permit gets it. So, you know, maybe something like that would be considered. You know, but you know, if I'm not in support of taking away a recreation opportunity for the children here. I support us, the taxpayers, paying for something like that. But organized events that cause a lot of wear and tear on our fields, that have the taxpayers have to then put their hand in their pocket to pay for, that's something then that we should be charging the users for. Right? It's if they're down, if they tear up the fields, and I can tell you, I've got friends that have children in the soccer program, and the Qualicum Beach field is much preferred over the Nanaimo field. I understand they have an artificial turf field up there. We're one of the few jurisdictions that don't have one. Maybe we might at some time find ourselves in a position to have a field like that if we started charging some fees. But I don't want to lock the gates on community children, but I don't want it to be a free-for-all for everybody to come in chewing up our fields and the taxpayers having to pay for it.
Mr. Manson, are you getting some idea of what Councillor Oates is saying and some of the others, that so we can come back? Let's move along here. I've got Councillor Patterson, Councillor Powell, Councillor Salter, and Councillor Beale.
Thank you, Worship. From what I'm hearing around the table is that we, from a staff point of view, haven't done a history or looked at fees and different rates and everything. Because as a business type person, I think about weddings and music festivals and economic drivers and all the sorts of different things that can bring in a fee to the city. So from my understanding is we as a city have never looked at other communities and see what we could do for Parksville. Is that correct?
If I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor Patterson, we actually do or have done some preliminary reviews with regards to sports field users fees / booking fees, what they're also called in some communities. There are quite a few areas or communities in BC that do charge them. I actually, in between this meeting and the last meeting, we polled about 25 communities. Probably 3/4 of them, to some degree or another, were charging user fees. The community that I came out of 20 years ago when I came to Parksville, they were charging a sports field booking fee. If you wanted to reserve a field to have it available for your group at such and such a time, you paid a $25 booking fee. So those types of things are out there.
Absolutely.
And really, that's all we're looking at. Is that something that council wants to consider? It is another source of revenue that will help defer some of the taxation costs, shifting it from a tax to a user fee. There's also methods within these sports groups for helping kids, people that are financially strapped. There's lots of organizations out there that help kids in that situation to still play organized sports.
Perfect. Can I have a follow-up, please, Your Worship, on that? So thank you very much for that. Was kind of that comment, because when we're finished our round of questions, I'd like to make a motion that staff look at getting back to us with a cost and user fee type scenario. But on that note, my question would be, who would be responsible for collection of the user fees, if it's in Parksville or if it's sports related? Is it an RDN aspect, and is it going to end up costing us money, or is it going to cost us a staff person?
Mr. Manson.
If I may, Your Worship, that's a very good question, and it has been considered. Right now, all booking of fields in District 69 are done through the regional district. They're doing it at no cost to the individual municipalities. If we did institute something in the way of sports field booking fees, there would be an administrative cost associated with it, and that is something that we would have to look at as part of the overall package to make sense, to see whether or not it made sense. Obviously, if it's going to cost us more to get the money than the money is worth, we're not going to do it. But it is a factor that would have to be considered and brought forward as part of the overall package.
So just as we continue down the line with those councillors that want to speak, remember that this is not going to be for this year. It's shaping up that Councillor Patterson's going to make a motion for a study, and if that study were to prove financially viable, we'd be looking at it for next year. So Councillor Powell, on that note.
Thank you, Your Worship. That's exactly what I was going to do when I put my hand up, to always make a recommendation. And I don't think there's a motion on the floor, is there? So we could make the recommendation anytime. So Councillor Patterson, do you want to make that motion, and I'll second it?
Thank you, if that's all right. At this time, Your Worship, I'd like staff to pursue a study for, maybe you could help me word it, for user fees and sports fees, and come back to council.
If I may, Your Worship, it would be something to the effect that staff be directed to review the options and possibilities of community park users' fees, sports field users' fees, and provide options and a recommendation for council's consideration.
I have a seconder by Councillor Powell. So speaking to the motion, Councillor Salt.
So I have no appetite for this, and I'll tell you why. I feel like I've fallen down a rabbit hole. That's how I feel. We saved apparently $800,000 the last budget meeting. We saved this. It only cost us $40,000 to move an office up here. We just saved $600,000 just now. We've saved $800,000 or $80,000 on not having a bylaw officer, another whatever it was, $10,000 or $20,000 on the car. We've saved all this money, and yet we've got no money for the park. And so I'm just not connecting all of this. We certainly have money to spend if we want to spend it on a room, but we don't have the money if we want to not charge people to use the parks. And really, it's not just, I get to speak to my motion. So, and it's not just school children. When we look at teams and team sports, so we don't charge the teams in our community, but we charge teams from outside of the community because they're coming in to use the fields, then they just don't come in. That's all. They just don't come. So they don't come and have team sports with our residents because they're having to pay. When there's a tournament in town, any tournament, the Royals, whatever, there's money that comes into town when these tournaments come. And so when there's anything that's going on in the park, people are up in town spending money. And we want to borrow $40 million for a water treatment plant. Our hands are in the pockets of our residents. They're not coming out. And now we want to go for the park. I am absolutely against this. I can't believe we're considering it.
Thank you. Councillor Beale.
Thank you, Your Worship. A couple of comments. One, I do appreciate that staff will come back with a number of recommendations and more than one option. I do want to see us have a look at what kind of minimal, but at the same time, fees we could consider. I'm certainly not, as Councillor Greer was saying, we need to see what kind of money are we talking about. If there's a $5 increase for someone to sign up for soccer, because that goes towards the city, that might not be too onerous. But I also want to come back to the bigger issue of parks. Our parks do cost a lot of money to maintain, and the fields certainly cost an awful lot, and it's quite specialized. And meanwhile, we do have a master parks plan, and there are many items in that parks plan that we can't undertake right now, that we just really don't have the funds for. So it's not only about this particular park or the community part or Springwood Park, but if we can free up a bit of money so that we can, in fact, look after other park areas and do the work that we want to be doing there so that, in fact, more of our community can get out and appreciate parks. I think that's also a benefit when we look at this.
Thank you. Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I would just like to go back to, I think it was 4 years ago when we did our budgeting process, and we decided to focus on the top three. And a consequence of that was we reduced the funding for parks. We froze funding for park maintenance. At that time, we had the Kite Fest in the park. That field was completely destroyed. We had to invest a whole whack of money in there to bring it up to community standards. As soon as we start doing that type of thing, and when you lower the taxes, there's less dollars for maintenance. We've gone from a 3% increase to a 2.0, 2.5, 3.0 to a 2.0. That's a 1% decrease. And so that's the consequences when we make these decisions about our tax increases. When you lower the taxes or when you say there's a zero tax increase, the consequence is a lot of these things fall by the wayside because it's more important for public safety, it's more important for legislative duties, and it's more important for infrastructure replacement. So, it's a tough decision. We're not going to get that money by lowering our taxes, and so I think I'm in a crazy zone. Are we going to get them so we can pay for the things we want to pay for? We can't afford it. And so I think we're being responsible to get a report from staff to find out exactly what our options are.
Okay, I think on that note, we've pretty much discussed what everybody's sentiments are and what everybody's preferences are. I want to say that the park is definitely stressed. And I also want to say before the vote that at some point in time after the budget is over and done with, I'm going to sit down with council and staff at public meetings and have a look at the park's master plan. Because as has been mentioned around the table tonight by different folk, Councillor Beale and Councillor Powell, our park is under stress. We're going to have to look at certain recommendations that have been made in the long-term capital plan. So, on that note, I'm going to call the vote. All those in favor of the motion made by Councillor Patterson? Opposed? Thank you. That Mrs. Lovegrove, would you please carry on?
Thank you, Your Worship. So moving along with the items, except for the changes that Council has just approved, we now have a new projected surplus with a 2% increase in the budget. So this is what the 20-year projection surplus looks like at this time. You will see that we move along quite nicely till about 2026, when there's still quite a few capital projects. We dip at that point. 2027 to 28, we still remain lower than our recommended $1 million. And then in 2031 and 2032, we go completely off the rails. So this is what the projections are right now, and that's based on the changes that we have discussed, except for the ones that Council has just approved in the last little while.
Stay there for a moment, please. One of the things that I want to point out to members of Council, my speech is about assets and being. The City of Parksville has roughly between $400 and $500 million worth of, I'll call it for a lack of a better term, stuff. Pipes, motors, roads, you can name it, goes on and on and on. Those things will be around in Parksville long after we're all gone. It'll be around in the next 10 years, it'll be around in the next 20 years, it'll be around in the next 30 years. So when you look at the budget, and you look, for example, if you get to 2023, the surplus goes down to $1 million. Now, when you get to 2026, it goes down to $500,000. So the decisions you make today will have an impact on those future years. And if we don't watch ourselves in terms of tax increases, at some point in time, you know, you wouldn't be looking at a 2% tax increase or a 3% tax increase. You'd be looking at a 5, 6, 7, or 8% tax increase. I've been around long enough for 12 years to tell you that that's exactly what happens. When I got on council in 2002, 2003, we had an infrastructure deficit, and by 2005 or 2006, we had to raise taxes by 2005 by 7.5%. And I never want to get into that situation again, because it's hard on the taxpayer. It really slows down the capital renewal and replacement program of the city. So I just want the council to keep that in mind. And if you go to 2031, you got a $2 million deficit. You go to 2033, you got an 800, and the beat goes on. So you can't look at this in terms of the tip of your nose. We've got to look much further down the road. So that's my spiel. Anybody on council have comments on the projected general fund unrestricted surplus deficiency? Councillor Grimm.
Well, that was a good speech, Mark, but I don't agree with it totally. For one thing, it's very difficult to look out 5 years, let alone 10 years, let alone go to 2032 or 2031. It all comes down to how much money you're spending. I mean, at the rate that we're spending, this, of course, might be the end result. But that doesn't mean that we continue to spend more than that's necessary. So every year is a different year. And it comes down to spending, not how much money we're bringing in, but what we're spending. So if we continue to go along at our present rate, I'm sure that's what it's going to be. But maybe through those years we cut back in some things and not pay for others. So, you know, it's so difficult to even talk about 2031.
I just want to point out, Councillor Greer, that the majority of these things, the majority of this money is for infrastructure. Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to the CAO, can you remember where we were ranked by the Canadian Taxpayers Federation as far as spending? I think we were in the top 5.
If I may, Your Worship, 2 is the number that sticks in my hand, but we're definitely pretty much at the top of being responsible for our spending.
Yes, and I think I asked the same question or similar question, just not the same way as Councillor Greer has, and this is a guesstimate. This is with the numbers that you have today that you come up with deficits, and I think that we're being extremely responsible, and I think it's ironic, the comments that Councillor Greer says after our discussion about the community park. And it's about, if you don't raise the taxes, you can't maintain the city. And I think it's a false assertion to say we're going to have a 0% tax increase, that we're spending money willy-nilly. And I think that this council, as far as I'm concerned, is very conservative, we're responsible, and we're always looking to the future.
CAO, do you want to make any further comments about the program? No?
I've been with the city for 20 years. When I got here, we instituted the whole concept of financial planning, long-term financial planning, to try and anticipate as best we could out over a long period of time, not only the revenues, not only the operating expenditures, but also the capital expenditures, in order to alleviate things that you're talking about, big tax swings one way or another. That planning over the past 20 years has really gotten the city to where it is right now. Financially, we're in very good condition. From a strictly infrastructure deficit point of view, as council is aware, the last time we went through the capital program, which was based on infrastructure renewal and replacement, it's pretty much funded. So as far as an infrastructure deficit is concerned, Parksville doesn't have one. What we also don't have, though, is such things as the archive. We don't have that, and nothing has been planned in the 20-year capital program for that. The Parks Master Plan, as you were alluding to, we do have a Parks Master Plan. We also have a Community Parks Master Plan. Those were done approximately 10 years ago. No funding was included in the budget for either of those. The emphasis was on the infrastructure renewal and replacing, looking after what we already had. A number of years ago, we did a downtown revitalization strategy with the associated costs for that. Again, because of funding requirements or the lack thereof, nothing was put in the budget with regards to those. We're at a position right now, I think, of again reviewing the 20-year plan, not only for the infrastructure renewal and replacement part of it, but these other things, to see council's appetite, council's views on how we can implement in amongst the renewal and or infrastructure replacement, these other things that are important to council as well. And you're right, this is a snapshot right now. It's based on the information that we have right now, the best information. Things will change. But at the same time, if you don't look at what's coming at you in the future with what you know, you're going to be terribly surprised when things do hit you. The more that you can anticipate what is coming, the better position you'll be able or be in to deal with not only those things, but also the things that do hit you that you haven't anticipated. So this is our best attempt with the information that we have right now to project in the future what's going to happen, to give us an ability to address it in small incremental stages over a period of years, rather than getting right up to the wall and then having to deal with it.
There's an old adage in the life cycle maintenance business that says you pay now or pay later. When you pay later, you pay more. And that's a known fact. Councillor Oates, did you have your hand up? Go ahead.
Just for clarification, this surplus deficiency document, that takes into account the earlier in the document where we deferred the two capital road projects, the PIM and the, so we're already pushing that identified need 5 years down the road for one and 3 years down the road for the other. So if we wanted to further adjust these numbers more, that would be one option, I guess, to push it down and let some other generation worry about it. Right?
Exactly. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And I think that's why when the CEO was talking, and the CEO and I have been having lots of discussions about this, after this year's budget is settled upon, whatever that may be, we as a council are going to be obliged, in my opinion, to sit down, look at the downtown revitalization plan, look at the Parks Master Plan, look at the community plan, look at the capital program in terms of what's there, because there are some big items there that we're going to have to bite the bullet on, and some either move them forward or move them back rather. So it's a very, very serious business. Yes, Councillor Salter.
One thing that Thank you, Your Worship. One thing that that comes to mind for me are some significantly expensive costs that are they're not around the corner. They're actually here, and that's the water treatment, the cost for our water in our treatment plant, and the cost for the sewage upgrades. And we know we're looking at $40 million. That's not, and this isn't staff at all. This is council making that decision. And so it was a decision that council made. It's the only decision council made. There's no A, B, or C. It's just, this is it, 40 million. And so that has to be calculated in here. So that being calculated in here impacts these numbers. It has to. And that's, part of that is that there was no other option. So to me, that's a problem. There should have been other options. There should have been other costs, and there weren't. But that's not a staff issue. That's a council issue.
But the for Parksville, it's not 40 million. It's 27 million, right? And do you want to discuss the options that we've looked at this, and we've looked at the potential for funding once we know what the blinking grant's going to be?
If I may, Your Worship, through to all of council, there's a couple of things. First of all, what we're looking at right now is the General Revenue Fund, the water treatment plant and intake, and all of the associated bits and pieces of that project are in the Water Utility Fund. Many options have been looked at with regards to supplying the water needs for the City of Parksville and our partners in ERWS. What staff was tasked to do was to provide council with the cheapest option that would provide for all of the needs of the various communities, which is exactly what we've done. Unfortunately, that cheapest option is still $37 million. Other options were looked at, but if you want to meet all of the criteria that have to be met, that is the cheapest option. Now, at $37 million, that's assumed that we can do it all at once. There are additional options that have been put forward that show the project being phased. It reduces the risk of having to borrow a significant amount of money by spreading that risk out over more years. The other unfortunate part, though, of doing that is that it's going to cost more because there would be various components of it that would be duplicated, for lack of a better term, to give us or to bridge us the time that we need to be able to phase it. So many options have been looked at. What we've brought forward and proposed to council with the recommendations of the various experts that have knowledge in the field of supplying water. This is the cheapest option that's available to the community to meet all of the requirements of the City of Parksville and our partners.
I wonder if, yes, Councillor Salter.
So I would just like to follow up with that. So when we speak, I just want to clarify, when I say that there was only one option, and you say, well, there's other options, what you're talking about is the same system, different costs. So the options are, it could be 27 million, it could be 37 million, but it's the same thing. It's Delphi. It's this glass. The option is this glass. It could be this full, or this full, but it's this glass that we're having. It's not going to be that glass. It's this one. That's not options. Options means there's a glass, there's a pitcher, there's a this. Those are different options, and those are different costs. There are other options out there. There are other costs out there. They haven't been looked at, not from staff, from the council, because it's council who make these decisions. So I'm saying when we're talking about this budget, and this budget being actually in the black, or in the red, in the 2030, whatever that is, 2031 and 32, that is also a result of it. Our decisions today are definitely a result of it. You're correct. And part of it is those big dollars that we're spending, and we're not speaking to the community about it. We're not asking the community. There are other options. I've seen them. They're sent to me, but we're not even looking at them. And we're sitting here with 2 years on us, hoping that we're going to be able to get that intake going. it's something we really need to take a look at.
I just want to add, I've been on the ERWS committee since it was formed 3 years ago, and I can assure you that all of the options by that committee and by the consultants were looked at, all of the different options. And we won't get into that tonight, but at some later point in time, we can review that. Any further comments before we move on to the Water Utility Fund? Yeah, Mr. Scott.
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship. What was the cost when Qualicum dropped out of the water system in French Creek? I mean, our costs remain the same, but what would they have added to reduce our costs?
I'm going off the top of my head, so I may be a couple of percentage points out. They were about 13% of the overall project.
I should point out, talking about the Qualicum Beach cost, Qualicum Beach did opt out of the ERWS, but they have a memorandum of understanding that if and when they ever need water, they want the ability to opt back in.
At a bigger price.
Yeah, much bigger price, yeah. Okay, so can we move on to the Water Utility Fund? Mrs. Lovegrove.
Thank you, Your Worship. The Water Utility Fund really didn't see any major adjustments since the last time we brought it forward to you. We have updated the reserve fund balances, so the opening balances are now reflective of the 2014 year-end figures. And again, we brought forward the 2014 carry-forward projects, the projects that were incomplete in 2014, and both the expense and the revenue portion has been brought forward so that there is no net impact in the Water Utility Fund. So based on that, as at March 18th, when the information was compiled, this is what the projections are for the next 15 years of the Water Utility Fund.
Any questions? Councillor Salter.
Just for clarification then, I was of the mind that we have already spent $5 million on the water, on this water treatment thing. Is that not correct? That we had spent 1.6 of a grant, and then the rest was whatever to make up $5 million. Is that not correct?
Significant, I'm not going to say yes or no to the $5 million, because off the top of my head I don't know. Significant monies have already been spent to get us to the point that we are right now for the exploration of options and determining which is the best option. So considerable monies have already been spent with regards to that. What we're looking at from this point forward, the $37 million, assuming Plan A, is the construction of the components of the water system that have been recommended to us. So that's what's in the budget, is the $37 million going forward from where we're at right now.
So where is that? Because the $5 million that we spent isn't. I'm not seeing that.
That's because it's already been spent in previous years.
Okay, so we spent nothing. So last year we didn't spend the $5 million or the 1.6?
Well, no, what I'm getting at is over the past number of years, monies have been spent. They were spent in previous years. This is the budget going forward. It's not an accounting of everything that's being spent. This is only what's going forward.
So this is a portion of that $37 million that we're going to be spending.
Well, the $37 million is from this point onwards.
Okay. Thank you.
Just a question on the ASR. We got a big grant to explore the ASR and to experiment with it. Did we not?
We did get a very significant grant. I believe $1.6 million.
Yeah. And that money's been
1.35.
That money's been spent.
I believe the majority of it has been spent. We're still testing the Claudette well system.
Yeah. Okay. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. So when we're looking at the Water Utility Fund, which is back a page, and we look at ERWS intake and treatment and ASR, those figures are general figures. Is that a safe statement I think I could make at this point? Because the intake still has to be looked at.
As I was saying, Your Worship, through to the rest of Council, these are the monies that have been incurred to get us to the point of where we are right now.
But this is being carried forward from 2014 to 15.
That's correct.
Okay. So it hasn't been spent because it's from 2014. So that's what I'm saying. It's from 2014, it's being moved forward to 2015, but those aren't realistic figures. Realistically, in 2015, because we don't know where, sorry, like when I look at, this is almost $2 million, and that with ERWS, so maybe you could explain.
I can tackle that. Those numbers up there are the amount that was in the 2014 budget. There were greater amounts than that for ERWS for our share. That's the unspent portion. It's being moved into 2015. There's also additional monies in the 2015 budget. This is just the amount that's being carried forward. There is additional funds in the 2015 budget for ERWS and the treatment in addition to these amounts.
And I understand that, but I guess what my point is that they're not really being used. For those amounts aren't realistic any longer. They're just being moved forward from 2014 to 2015. Those projects aren't being carried forward with that amount of money.
CAO.
Sorry. There are components of the project that have to be done. Each component of the project, whether it's ERWS or any other capital program, those components oftentimes go over a year. So the original amount budgeted for it could have been $2 million. The ERWS intake park's full share at 1.37. It could have originally been $2 million. $1 million of it have already been spent. This is the remainder of that specific project.
Councillor Salter.
Just to clarify, I'm just wondering, so what you're saying is we had $2 million, we spent $1 million, we've got 1.37 or 1.37 left over. We're gonna spend that, and if we need more, we've got that budgeted later on in the budget.
No, it's not quite like that. Each of those items, every carry forward that we put forward, regardless of what it is for a specific thing, a specific project, a specific capital item. As that project capital item is done, we spend the budget. A year end comes along, we have to account things on a calendar year. So we've spent a portion of the budget and up to that calendar year. The portion of that budget that hasn't been spent for that specific project is carried into the next year. And we continue spending from the original budget to finish that project. That's what the carry forwards are.
Can we move forward to the projected water fund unrestricted surplus deficiency on the next page? Question I have, Mr. Manson, with regards to these figures which look to be in fairly good shape, is the borrowing included in this?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Off the top of my head, I can't remember what grant. This assumes a $24 million grant. The rate increases are projected at, I believe it's 1%. We've also done, this is, how do we put it, or how should I put it? In terms of the budget, this is Plan A, which is the most costly at the beginning. So that covers us as far as funds are concerned. If we have to go to Plan B, option 4, the cost would be spread out over a greater period of time. The grant would be less, but the borrowing would be more. This is the optimal budget. When we get notification of where the grants will be, we would have to come back and revise the budget if they don't come in at the $24 million amount that we're looking at, which at this point, I think we've probably come to the conclusion that it's pretty unlikely. But we do have a plan B. It will reduce the short-term costs, but it will stretch the whole program out over 30 years as opposed to what this is projecting over 20 years.
So these figures would change?
They'll definitely change. For the short term, they will go down, but the overall cost will be more. As we discussed earlier when we talked about utility rates, the Plan B option is what we chose the rates on because they would have been the higher. So from the rates point of view, instead of a 1% increase, it would have to be a 2% increase. Over the period of time, the reserves that we see out over the 30 years are more or less the same because we've stretched the costs out over a longer period of time.
To minimize the impact on the taxpayer?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Who had their hands up? Councillor Powell, I believe? No?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Oates? Oh, okay. I must be seeing things. Okay. Seeing no further questions, Sewer Utility Fund. Mrs. Lovegood.
Thank you, Your Worship. And again, with the Sewer Utility Fund, basically the only changes that were made were the reserve fund balances were updated to reflect the 2014 year-end results, and we added the 2014 carry-forward projects. So again, the projects are listed for you for the operating and the capital. And based on those changes, this is what the projected accumulated surplus looks like for the Sewer Utility Fund.
CAO, getting back to the, I think it was Councillor Salter that made the comment about the sewer upgrade plant in French Creek. Are those, we don't know what those figures are going to be yet, do we? We don't know all of the figures anyway. We have some idea. We know that 15% is going to be paid for by DCCs, but the balance will be paid for by the taxpayer.
If I may, Your Worship, I think it's actually the other way around. 85% would be paid by DCCs, 15% would be paid for by the taxpayer. The French Creek sewage treatment plant is administered and looked after under the regional district's budget. Our impact of it is through the requisition that they give us on an annual basis. It is included in those figures with their guesstimations as to DCC revenues and the impact on the consumptions through the 15% of the cost.
Councillor Oates.
This assumes a how much percent rate increase per year?
I believe that was a 5% increase per year. The other point that Council should be aware of, that the sewer charges are pretty small. What is it on an average family? $53 for 6 months. So a 5% increase is, in dollar terms, is pretty small.
The other thing I wanted to point out to Council as we come to the end of this presentation is there's something that's not on here because it can't be here. We don't know the details yet. But we've been told by Island Health that Island Health is going to spend roughly $300 million over the next decade on the Nanaimo Regional General Hospital. New power plant, new tower for patients, a cancer center, and so forth and so on. We in Oceanside, as part of the RDN, will end up paying approximately 40% of that. So we don't know. We were told by Island Health probably 18 months to 2 years ago that this was coming. We're expecting to see some more information, possibly this year. I don't know. I'll be meeting with Island Health. That's one of the first questions I intend to ask them. So, and our percentage of 40% will also have an impact on our taxes. So to come back to the overall picture, it's pay now or pay later, because we know these things are coming and we have a responsibility. We can't really tackle this year, I don't think, and I don't know what year we'll be able to tackle it, maybe next year, but we don't know when that's going to start. They've said they've done some things in terms of the emergency room and in terms of some of the operating rooms. They've made some changes because we all pay for that through our contribution to the RDN. But that's a pretty big sum of money, and it's something that we're going to have to face at some point in time. So, questions? Councillor Greer, Councillor Oates, and Councillor Salton.
Thank you, Your Worship. About a month ago, our previous mayor, Paul Reitsman, who's in the audience today, brought forth a question that we haven't answered or we haven't touched, and it's to do with accumulated sick days. It seems like Qualicum faced this last year, and according to his figures, they had 120 days, and they've reduced it down to the union employees' maximum 60 days. Ours, for some reason or another, councils must have been very lenient somewhere down the road, but we have a maximum 261 days, and our union employees maximum 60 days. How much of this is in the budget, or is this a cost that's in the budget?
If I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor Greer, that's already included in the budget as part of the benefit cost of employees. As Council is aware, or at least some councillors are aware, those who were on Council last year, Council did instruct staff to look at all of our exempt wages and benefits to see how we compared to other organizations. That is a report that is available to Council, and it showed that we were about comparable when you take into account all factors of compensation with other communities.
But are you talking the accumulated sick days or just the overall?
I'm talking all benefits, all remuneration as a total package in comparison to the total package provided by other communities. As that report shows, we are very comparable to others.
But it seems unreasonable that we're at 261 days when everyone else is at 60 days.
If I may, Your Worship, sometime in the past, when that was provided, it was provided as a compensation in lieu of other compensation. So when you take everything into consideration, not cherry-picking little bits and pieces, when you take everything into consideration, our compensation package is very comparable to all other communities.
Well, I understand what you're saying, but I still think that's an awful lot of sick days to pay out if somebody's hasn't been sick, if you're adding up all those days. And I'd like to know what that cost is to us.
If I may interject, the payout is never 261. It's not that full amount at any time, is it?
The payout rate now is 50% of unused sick leave.
So it's 50% of the 261? Is that what you're saying? You're sure?
Absolutely positive. Whatever accumulated sick leave is, the payout upon bona fide retirement, not if I was to leave to another community, only upon bona fide retirement would be 50% of unused sick leave as part of the overall compensation package. And as I said before, that was provided at a time in lieu of other compensation. So it wasn't over and above, it wasn't grandiose or whatever. It was a purposely thought out offering to staff in lieu of other compensation.
What other compensations would it be lieu of?
Wages.
There is a report. You can read the report.
I'd like to know what the
CO
other councillors have to say about this issue.
I've written a note to myself. I'll be getting a copy of the report so that I can look at it there. I've learned more tonight than what I understood, because when the question was asked, I understood it was 200. Everybody got 261 sick days. This sheds further light on it. 50% of accumulated sick leave upon bona fide retirement, and that it was in lieu of other types of compensation. Seems like a reasonable explanation to me, but I do look forward to reading the report.
CEO will send that out tonight or tomorrow morning. You've got it. Yeah, I know that I've got it. You've got it. Okay. Next, Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Worship. I do remember that report, and I remember time after time we've had comparisons with different communities regarding wages, and we have always been under what other communities are. And I know that that has always been brought up, the sick bank, and it is a trade-off. And I think excluded staff has shown that in that report, and how it is a trade-off. It's not as simple as 261 sick days. It's like there's a bigger issue, it's a bigger picture, and I think I strongly encourage the rest of council to have a read.
Councillor Salter.
I don't really want to speak to this issue. I had something else I wanted to talk about, so I guess I didn't want to talk about it.
Just to wind this up, I just got a final question. This was brought forward, so I had, it was my duty, I think, and my responsibility to bring it up. And I haven't seen the report, but I'd like to see it, and when I do see it, we can talk further on it.
CAO.
If I may, Your Worship, yes, you have seen the report. You were on council when it was brought forward before.
Well, in that case, I've forgotten. I'll have to review it. That's not the only thing I've forgotten.
You're like me. You've got a great memory, but it's short.
Short. Thank you.
Councillor Beale. Okay, so wait a minute here. You had your hand up. You had your hand up. Okay, so Councillor Beale, Councillor Salter, Councillor Oates.
Thank you, Your Worship. I was just, and thank you very much for the presentation this evening, and I appreciated the pace. It was very nice to follow. Something I'm not seeing in here is any mention of the health and safety officer. I know that was something that was discussed earlier on, and I'm wondering, I'm then assuming that is in the budget.
If I may, Your Worship, through to Councillor Beale, as of right now, yes, that position is still in the budget. That's one of the items that I believe that Councillor Greer brought up at the beginning of this evening to find out where we are. I do remember that one, and that is still in the budget, yes.
Yes, I guess I'm looking forward to a further conversation about this and whether or not we would keep that in the budget for this coming year.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I just want to make that motion to review the permissive tax policy to allow an exemption for the curling club. So can staff look into that and bring something forward for us to review? And I guess I need
Good memory.
Seconder.
Good memory. I forgot all about it. So Councillor Patterson, seconded by Councillor Patterson. Any further discussion on that particular motion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Thanks, carried. Thank you very much, and thank you for remembering that. Councillor Oates?
So, when I go away to do my homework, which documents will I be able to look at? Out of these documents here, this one, and this one, and the one provided tonight, to give me a picture of what the budget is? Is it this one and this one?
most recent one that we've provided you builds on all of the others.
And that's this one.
That's correct. If council would like, we can consolidate everything into one document and make it available to you.
Please do that, because our next meeting is on April the 13th, so let's consolidate it.
So we'll consolidate everything into one budget to show exactly where everything is, so you know what's in, what's out, and where we're at. We can certainly do this, and we'll make it available much prior to the meeting so that you have an opportunity to give it some meaningful consideration.
Please and thank you. That's yes. Councillor Oates.
Not on. Is that before? This, so this one here, February 23rd, then this one was revised, right? And I think that this is the one that we have now. Not sure, Councillor Salter, if you, there was a couple of sheets that were put in, right? And so that, in combination with this document, should give me a clear picture of where we're at?
That's correct, to the best of my
That's what
knowledge.
I've been looking at. Right on. I haven't wasted my time. Good.
I think we've got them all, just not maybe all here. I think we've got them all, but we may not all have them here.
As I said, for council's benefit, we will consolidate it all into one package so that you can have a clear picture of exactly where you are.
Councillor Greer.
Thank you. So we're still going to discuss the 50,000 park master plan, are we not? The 24,000 server network and firewall security, and these ones that I listed. I think these are very important if we're going to spend the money on them or if we're not, because it comes to $1 million. So I haven't heard any discussion on these.
If I may, Your Worship, we have...
Other than the archival storage building, 600,000.
We actually, if I may, Your Worship, we have actually discussed these with council in the past, or in past meetings. I would like to add a little bit more to the $50,000 for the Parks Master Plan, or Community Parks Master Plan, sorry. At a council meeting in the not too distant past, you heard a presentation from the Beach Fest Society with regards to the possibility of bringing the World Sandcastle, whatever that thing is, Sandcastle competition to Parksville. Staff was directed by council to meet with the Beach Fest Society to see how that could be accommodated. We have, in fact, met with them. How do I put this? They were approached by the World Sandcastle competition as opposed to the Beach Fest going to the Sandcastle people. So they're not overly enthusiastic about putting this on. It is something that they're looking at, but they're not in a big panic to do it.
It's a huge undertaking, and I think they put it off to 2017 or something.
Well, it is a huge undertaking, and they're a little nervous of going that far. The other side of that issue is the community park itself. It is really getting up to its maximum capacity. I would suggest that it's turning from a community park to more of a special events park. We're at the position right now, if we wanted to accommodate the World Sandcastle competition, why is that so darn hard to say? Yeah. Anyway, if we wanted to accommodate that competition, the only way we could do it would be to take an area away from some other activity. We're at the point right now where we really should review what the I guess, the long-term plans for the park is to determine how we want to go forward. That's what that study is talking about, is to redo the community park master plan that was last looked at about 10 years ago, to again do community engagement to see what the community thinks should be done in that park, to give council and us an idea of where we should be going.
So are we talking consultants to do this, or are we talking about staff doing it?
If I may, Your Worship, it would be done through consultants, the same as it was done 10 years ago. 10 years ago, it cost about $30,000. It took about 6 months. We're estimating that now, 10 years later, it'll take about the same amount of time, and we're budgeting $50,000. The other part of this is that we literally this afternoon learned that there's a possibility of a grant for this.
Yeah.
Yes, Councillor Greer.
Yeah. Well, continue with Councillor Beal's discussion on the Occupational Health and Safety Coordinator. Can we settle on that tonight? Well, I'll make a motion that we drop the Occupational Health and Safety Coordinator at $87,500.
Seconded by Councillor Salter. Any discussion on that motion? Councillor Beal.
Yes, certainly at this point in time, I would support the motion that's put forth. But I would like to add that I really do recognize that there are a lot of requirements that are put on all workplaces by WorkSafe BC and others, and there's a lot of training and education and ongoing work that needs to be done. But I also feel that in an organization that has slightly fewer than 100 people working, and with a really, I think really a fantastic management team, a really fantastic, I'll use that word quite sincerely, team of exempt staff and managers, I would hope that that the city can work together to accomplish what needs to be done and work with staff accordingly so that we can keep everyone safe and move forward. But I would not support hiring and adding to the position at this time.
CAO.
If I may, Your Worship, again, this has been discussed once before with Council. Regardless of whether or not this position is approved or not, there are health and safety, WorkSafe BC, and other regulations that we have to adhere to, and we will continue to adhere to them. The issue is really who will do it. Right now it's being done off the side of managers' desks. That means that they can't be proactive in the things that they're doing while they're looking after the health and safety issues. What this position would do would be to literally to free up those managers to do the management jobs, the forward thinking, the planning, to help us be more efficient and effective in the other things that we're doing. So it's really a case of service level. That's what it's all about. You're right. We are a relatively small organization, but there are many, many new requirements that have been downloaded onto us. And it takes away the time and energy that managers have in doing what they were originally hired to do these health and safety things. Whether or not we have it this year or sometime in the future, we will be continuing to bring it forward as an item for council to consider. But it really is a service issue item.
Councillor Salter, and then Councillor Patterson.
Oh, thank you, Your Worship. So, as an occupational health and safety member myself, we actually just set up another meeting for the 30th of this month. We meet every month. We do it off the side of our desks. Management does it off the side of their desks, so do we. And that is the picture in most workplaces across BC right now. WorkSafe, I'm sure, are aware of that. I don't know of a community yet that has an occupational health and safety position to manage that, but I have no appetite at this time to agree to financing an occupational health and safety person.
Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Directed to our CAO. If we didn't go with a full-time position, and if we went with a 0.4 or 5, would that elevate, or do you actually, and then do they need an office space kind of thing as well? I'm just throwing out some options that we may not have considered, because when I look at, I'm not sure where this person would be housed, if it would be in administration or if it would be in, and do we even have the office space?
I guess the answer is any help is better than no help. Predominantly, this person would be operating out of the public works. That's where most of the, that's where most of the employees that the training is specifically directed towards. Any help is better than no help, so that would be a consideration as well.
Follow up, Your Worship. So instead of making a decision this evening, can we ask staff to come back with some other options for us? Because at this point, they've only...
We have a motion on the floor, so we'll have to deal with that first.
I believe that a motion to refer would be in order.
What's your pleasure on the motion to refer? Seconder? No, I think if you refer it, it outdoes the motion, does it not?
A referral motion, you can make it, but there's no discussion. It's either you do or you don't.
Okay, so we have a referral motion. Do I need a seconder?
Yes.
I need a seconder for the referral motion. Do I have a seconder for the referral motion made by Councillor Oates? Councillor Patterson. Just call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? Let me do that again. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Okay, thank you. Motion is referred. Would Ms. Kleibel like to make a comment? She's in Human Resources, and yes?
It's being deferred, so that's the end of this.
Councillor Greer.
I just like to bring forth a question, and we budget every year for 16 policemen. However, in my time, I believe we haven't paid any more than 14 policemen, but we still budget for 16. Is there a particular reason for that, or could we drop one policeman so we save $120,000?
If I may, Your Worship, there wouldn't be any saving if you change the budget from 16 to 15. We would still end up paying, as you said, if we only ended up with 14, we'd still only end up paying for 14. The issue is, I guess, a risk and being conservative. We are on the books right now for a contingency of 16 RCMP officers. If the moon, the sun, Mars, Venus were to align, and it was such that all 16 officers were there for the year or a portion of the year, we would be required to pay it. If we only had budgeted for 15 and 16 were there, we'd be in a deficit position. Regardless of what we budget, we only pay for what we have. So there is no saving. It would simply be a budget item that's now less.
So would that go into surplus, would it?
The difference between what we budget and what we pay for, or let's put it a different way, anything over and above the revenues, or if we collect more revenue in a year than we spend, it goes into surplus. So if we budget assuming 16 and we end up with more revenue, yes, it would go into surplus.
Yeah. So that's what I don't see the point. I don't see ourselves growing from 14 to 16. Why we would budget for 16?
Because that's the number that we're slated to have. That's the number that we could end up with.
But that was because there was a motion passed at some time to carry 16 police.
Council has authorized a contingent of 16 officers.
So we can change that.
It's totally up to you.
Not without consultation with the RCMP. I would suggest that would have to be done.
Well, it's just a question I'm asking. You can see where I'm going with all these questions. My budget is being cut here, and sooner or later I'll be making a statement.
Any further questions from members of council before going to the audience who've been very patient? Okay, questions from the audience, and thank you for being so patient. I would have left a long time ago, but sure, come on down. Yeah. Needs any introduction?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council and staff. And yeah, we've been patient. In fact, I had a very hard choice to make tonight: either go to a bridge game or come into an exciting budget meeting, and I chose this one actually. As a side comment, I was smiling when Mr. Menz mentioned 1994, when he was hired during our time, because he set out a philosophy as directed by council and subsequent councils as well, to adhere to a fairly strict philosophy, which subsequent councils had stuck to, and it really has paid off dividends. And my suggestion is that you, as a new council, carry on that financial torch, because it's paid dividends. When we're in the top 5 for so many years, it says a lot. One or two questions, if I might. If you want to go back to the first regarding the curling club, I need some clarification. Did council authorize a $3,000 grant and aid to the curling club? They did. So that the curling club can pay $3,000 in taxes. All right. The $3,000 in taxes will be treated like any other tax bill, which means that part of it goes to the hospital, part of it goes to the RDN, part of it goes to the regional district. So council has just invested $3,000 to get roughly 50% goes to the city and 50% goes to the outside authorities. I don't think it's very prudent to spend $3,000 to make $1,500. You would have been much better off, like they did with the bowling club, because you're not being selective then, to give them the exemption of $1. You're now spending $3,000 to collect $1,500, while your philosophy is to try and get more dollars. I don't see it.
Our bylaw doesn't allow it. There's a bylaw that says that they must pay the taxes, so the only way we could get the money to them is through a grant and aid.
Well, you could have changed the bylaw, because now you're... Well...
Change the bylaw tonight.
No, I know, but maybe for next year, because you just spent $3,000 to make $1,500. I know, but I just want to point out that if you want to raise money, you don't spend $3,000 to raise $1,500. It's just not, we don't do that in business. Secondly, in terms of the accrued sick days, when I went through the budget, what stood out to me is the 261 days. There was no comment when you look at the 2013 audited financial statements. I did not find any comment, nor appendix, nor clarification that 50% maximum would be paid out on a bona fide basis. I should like to point out that I've not done any research in terms of compensation to senior staff in the 4 jurisdictions in our area. I like to think that they're reasonably similar. I should also like to point out that it was the the director of finance, the treasurer of Qualicum Beach, John Marsh, who we, by the way, hired in the early 90s, as the CEO will remember, he, on his own volition, brought it forward to council to change the 120 days to 60 days. I will do some research in terms of remuneration to senior staff. And the last comment I have is how much money has been spent to date on the water treatment plant by Parksville? Not to the dollar, but just roughly.
Do we have a ballpark figure, roughly?
If I may, Your Worship, I'd be guessing if I said anything. I can certainly go back through the records for previous years to make that number available.
We've been spending money for about 3 years now, 3 or 4 years, roughly.
Would you look like in the millions?
I guess it depends how far back you want to go. The whole concept of the Aerosmith Water Service, which has morphed into the offshoot of ERWS, it started before I came to the city of Parksville.
But I think in terms of what you're asking, I think you're asking when the ERWS was created to work on the treatment
right,
plant.
and
Yeah,
the portion of Parksville.
Yeah, we can make those numbers known.
And the last comment, and I think I've mentioned, it might have been mentioned before, and I'm, by the way, in full praise of staff here. You've got just excellent, excellent staff. I notice when I come to council meetings, you generally have about 6 people, 3 on either side. And I've noticed that sometimes, of course, their individual portfolios are not on the council agenda. Is staff being compensated for being here during the evening in terms of getting hours off? When I wonder if sometimes if they all need to be here.
I'm trying to go back in memory as to when it was implemented. It's been changed. Some are and some aren't, is the answer. Anybody that was in place 3 or 4 years ago, I guess, is getting 2 weeks in lieu of holidays for any after-hours work. New hires aren't getting that anymore, so some are, some aren't.
So it's kind of being grandfathered, yeah. And this is not in any way a slight to staff. I happen to think Parks are very blessed with good staff, but sometimes I wonder if all of staff needs to be present at particular meetings, if there is a cost associated with it, whether it's bank time or time off. That's all.
In my experience, what would happen is if one staff didn't show up, then you'd get a question. You wouldn't be able to answer it.
That's all. Thank you very much.